telling them a lot about what good behaviour means in your classroom. This is how I want to come in, leave, transition between activities, and so on and so on. But anything you can think of, you can teach them what the norm is for it, on the assumption, on the recognition, on the understanding that they might not know what it is already. In fact, on the assumption that a lot of them won't. So it's safer just to teach everyone. So when a student believes that it's normal to behave, it's much more likely that they will behave. So try to remember to flood students all the time with normative messages. This is what we do around here, and so on. Now, I see somebody's writing on the screen now. How dare you? Oh, it's vanished. Oh, the joys of co-sharing a slide. Now, at least nobody wrote a rude word. Heaven forbid, I'm not sure you could come back from that. So kids think misbehaviour is normal when they see it all the time. If you see lots of kids doing it, then it's normal. If they get lots of glory or status for doing it from other kids, it's normal. If staff don't do anything about it, it's normal. Or if staff are very inconsistent. So if one day you're super tight on punctuality, but you're not at the next, and there's no reason for the difference other than that you're in a different mood, then the kids will know, all they'll learn is that you're very, very inconsistent. So make sure that you are consistent. Otherwise, they'll know the norm is inconsistency. And how do you build these norms? Well, first of all, you tell them explicitly all the time. I mean, I said teach, don't tell, but you do have to tell them at some point. So have big formal discussion moments, or rather pedagogical moments where you're teaching the curriculum you want to see. So, for example, at the beginning of term, in assemblies, form time, the first day you meet the kids, the first lesson you've got the kids. I mean, personally speaking, so my speciality was secondary. So I would spend at least the first lesson or two saying, these are the norms of my classroom, if I could get away with it. And see, I know some schools that spend the whole first day, particularly in the primary sector or in year 7 transition sector, just talking about the norms, the behavioural expectations, how to walk in the corridors, how to hand in homework, how to sit at a desk, how to look into the teacher, how to format an essay, how to have a debate, how to go play with a Duplo, how to go to play with a sandpit, whatever. The point is you teach them all the stuff that you know they don't know. I mean, a good example is group work. I mean, mileage varies with group work. I'm not a fan, if I'm honest, of most usage of group work in contemporary classrooms, although I do accept that has utility. But here's the thing. Here's a really bad idea. Saying to a bunch of kids, go and do some group work without telling them how to work in groups. I mean, most adults I know don't know how to work in groups. Why would a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old know how to work in a group? Next thing you do, use normative messages. This is what we do around here. This is what they're doing. Look at them. I don't want to see that here because that's not what we do. Demonstrate the behaviour yourself, because kids need a concrete example. It's really useful also to use other kids in your classroom to demonstrate the good behaviour. It also recognises and gives status to that child too. Although, top tip, don't use the same kid all the time. Don't lower your expectations. Don't stop expecting behaviour to be good. You should always expect it to be good, even if it isn't. Otherwise, you start to impose a ceiling on their behaviour. Constantly push back when norms are incorrect, and repeat yourself constantly. Otherwise, they'll forget. And that's the whole point. You're meant to repeat yourself and repeat yourself and repeat yourself. Don't just tell them the norms, demonstrate the norms. Don't just say punctuality is important and then not say a thing when they're late. If you say punctuality is important, then do something when they're late. And that's how you demonstrate the norm is actually the norm. Otherwise, you just demonstrate that you say one thing and mean another. And then moving on to routines. Routines they're basically norms, so I can probably skate through this quite nicely. And by a routine, I mean it's a behaviour or a sequence of behaviours that you want to be the same pretty much all the time. So a norm can be something quite broad, like I want you to be kind, I want you to work hard, and so on. And you can demonstrate that in lots of different ways. You can teach in lots of different ways. But a routine is much more crunchy. It's much more specific. A routine is like, this is how I want you to come into a classroom. Do this, then this, then this. Stand here, put your jacket there, put your book there, do this. Get the Duplo, and so on. When you are answering a question, this is what I want you to do. When you're transitioning from a desk to the table, from a table to a desk, this is what I want you to do. You can teach any routine you want, but the first thing you have to do is you have to identify the routine. And normally the routine you need is when you've got a gap between the behaviour you have and the behaviour you want to have. And you normally have to teach a routine to kind of stitch these two things together. So if the transitions are terrible, to take 5 minutes to go from one activity to the next, teach them how to do transitions. Teach them exactly what you want them to do, how you want them to sit, where you want them to stand, what you want them to say or do. Teach them how to listen to you. You know, some schools use the kind of the slant or the star method, and you know, again, mileage varies. You know, you be you, you do you, but make sure the kids know how to, for instance, listen to you. You know, close your books, eyes on me, whatever, you know, you be you. But you identify the routines you need. I would also stress that you must lean into the school routines as well. You must uphold them, otherwise the school has no routines. You are a vehicle, you are an arm and a leg of the school culture. So if you don't do the school culture, if you don't know the school behaviour policy, the culture falls apart. And we only achieve healthy, positive school cultures when everybody in the school culture supports one another, even if you're not a big fan of some aspects of the school culture. You know, newsflash, nobody is. I've worked in lots of schools. I haven't agreed with every single one of the policies, but you do them because that's the job. That's the nature of the job, to participate and support the culture. If you don't like doing that, then go be a tutor. Teach the sons and daughters of Swiss diplomats. Transmit the routines, but by that I mean teach it to them. Don't just tell them, teach it to them. Do activities, quiz them and so on. And then practice it. And I think this is something which is massively underdone, is that often we're reasonably good at saying these are the rules, these are the norms. I say often, not always, but then we don't get them to do them. Memory, as they say, is the residue of thought. We remember what we think about. And that's why practice is one of the fundamentals of good learning. It's one of the most robust findings from educational research when it comes to the learning science, which is that doing something over and over again embeds it in your long-term memory, whether it be practicing a tennis swing or conjugating a verb, or number bonds up to 20 or whatever. Practice helps. I was going to say practice makes perfect, but it doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. But imperfect practice makes imperfect. So if you get someone to practice something badly, they'll learn how to do it badly. They'll become more habituated into doing something badly, which is, you know, not what you're looking for. So don't for 1 second allow kids just to half-ass a routine and then say, oh, that's fine. Because they'll get better at doing it fine, if not worse. You know, perfect practice makes perfect. So try to focus on that. But, you know, if you want kids to line up outside a classroom, first of all, teach them how to do a line. Teach them what you mean by a line. There's lots of different types of lines. So teach them what you mean. Volume, what activities should they be doing? What way should they be facing? Are they allowed to stand next to somebody or not? Can they move around or do they have to stand still? Against the wall, up the middle? You tell them. Should they be getting the planners ready or the uniform checked? You tell them and get them to practice it, get them to do it. And once they've done it a couple of times, you can get them to critique it in the line and say, well, what do you think? And then once they've done that a couple of times, you can say, let's do it one more time, because practice makes perfect, or rather, perfect practice makes perfect. And then I want to finish on this, which is the third leg of the tripod, and it's behaviour feedback systems. Now, a lot of people have heard of assessment for learning or formative assessment. And again, it's one of the other most highly substantiated pieces of work in educational research when it comes to learning sciences. Assessment for learning or formative assessment is basically this. If you want to make a really, really big impact on somebody's learning, one of the best things you can do is to give them very high quality feedback on what they've just done. So if somebody does some maths examples and they make a kind of common mistake through all of them, you correct the one, you tell them which ones they got right. You check that they followed the right procedure, and then you correct their misconception, you correct their misunderstanding. So that feedback tells them what to do next. And this sounds obvious that we should do this, but I go see a lot of classes, and a lot of the time I see teachers just giving kids an activity and then moving on, activity, moving on. And the teacher thinks, oh, we've done loads today, but they haven't because the kids didn't learn half of it. So you're going to have to do it again. So feedback is really important for learning. Now, given that I think the behaviour is a curriculum, you can see where I'm going with this. That if you want kids' behaviour to get better, after they've behaved, they need to get behaviour feedback. Assessment for behaviour, in other words. They need to know what they did right or wrong, what you think of it, whether you approve of it or not, and also how to do better in the future. Does that make sense? So you look at it in a kind of curricular sense, you look at it in a pedagogical sense, and this is how we teach something in the first place. And this is the beauty of it, that I fancy that most people listening to this know a few things about teaching. Good. So apply that to how we give feedback for people's behaviour. And she stressed that this phase of behaviour management can also include things like sanctions and rewards, because that too is feedback on your behaviour. You know, your behaviour stunk, and you've got a sanction as a result to deter you. But I just mentioned a couple of things here. Your feedback on their behaviour could be, for example, a clarification. Maybe they didn't understand what to do. Maybe they're not sure which corridor they're supposed to be in. Maybe they don't know what question they're supposed to be on. If kids aren't doing what you want them to do, my suggestion is just for a second check that they know what they should be doing. Because if it's an informational deficit, then you fix the problem instantly without antagonizing them. Or maybe there's a support need. Maybe the children have got SEND, which needs some kind of level of accommodation support or assistance. Or maybe there's a teaching need for kids mucking about because they can't read. Well, obviously that's not a form of SEND, I suppose. But if a child is, if a child missed a lesson, maybe they need to be taught the stuff in that lesson, because let's face it, they're not going to catch up otherwise. And you can leave a child very, very far behind if they miss out some of the foundational stuff. So there's lots of things you can do to respond to misbehaviour. It might be a reminder, or eye contact, or tapping the desk, or you could distract them by saying something like, "Oh, that was some great work yesterday, Daniel. Let's see some more today." Compliment them, or you could say something to the whole class like, "Don't forget, we've all got to get to question 10 before we can leave," or something like that. There's loads of little nudges you can give to people, and we don't have enough time to go into them just now. But there's lots of things you can do to try to encourage good behaviour after the event, which don't always have to involve sanctions and rewards. But drum roll, sanctions and rewards, I think they are essential, right? Particularly sanctions. I am a huge advocate, not fan, advocate of things like sanctions. But let me be quite clear here. Behaviour management is 95% persuasion and 5% compulsion. And I hope I've managed to persuade you that I believe this, because I've spent 57 minutes talking about proactive behaviour management and how we don't do enough of it and how to do it. Because I think it's incredibly important. And I think the more you do that, the more results you get with children. But here's a problem. Not a problem. Here's a dilemma for us. I think sanctions are essential. If you take sanctions away from a system, the whole system collapses. If you said to people, "I want you to drive really safely on the road, and I'm going to teach you how to drive," and you have to pass an exam, for example, to drive, but there's no penalty for how you drive afterwards, what do you think roads would be like? And award yourself a prize if you think the roads would be hellish. The roads would be awful, because people would drive like mad, men and women. Not even all people, not even most people, just some of them. Not even a big minority. Like 1% might drive like nutters, because people like to be first, like to drive fast. They want to be behind people because people just want to see the world burn, or people are late, or angry, or cruel, or obnoxious, whatever. There's lots of reasons why somebody would want to drive fast, even if they knew that it was against the law and against the speed limit. If there was no consequences for your action, some people would still do it, and it would ruin it for everyone else. So you must have sanctions. Now, they're only one part of the jigsaw, as I hope I pointed out, but they are an essential part. They're like the spark plug of a car. If you don't have them, all of your good intentions and all of your lovely training and teaching will dissolve as soon as you meet a kid who's just incredibly tough, or just really wants to disrupt your lesson. They can't all be persuaded by good instruction. In the same way that you can't teach everybody to be a good driver. You can give them the skills they need to be a good driver, but that's not the same thing as them wanting to be a good driver, or indeed them caring enough for being a good driver. So you must have sanctions and rewards. They're only one part of the jigsaw, though. They're not universally effective. But here's the living truth. There's no strategy that's universally effective. There's no one thing. We use as many of our strategies as possible to achieve the end we want. So a couple of tips about sanctions. Use the school behaviour policy as much as possible. Use it to the letter, and be as consistent as you possibly can. Because everything we know about deterrence, which is what a sanction is, it's just a deterrent. There's nothing more than that. Is that if you want to maximise the deterrent, they have to be incredibly predictable. Like a speed camera, you have to know that the camera's going to go off when you drive past it. You know you're going to get a fine or a penalty for it, and that's what deters you. And it doesn't work on everybody, but it doesn't. It's not meant to. It's meant to reduce the frequency of misbehaviour, of speeding. Speed cameras don't stop all speeding, but they're bloody useful. for slowing down speeding. And another thing about sanctions, they're just a short-term behaviour modifier. They don't change people forever. Nobody was ever punished into being good, like Jean Valjean from Les Miserables, but they're a short-term deterrent behaviour modifier, and they're incredibly useful. And they don't affect everyone equally. Some people are more deterred than others, but you've got to get that certainty right. And don't let a sanction slide for somebody because you think, oh, they'll never show up, or that kid's going to blow up if I give them a sanction. That's when you must give a sanction to demonstrate to the rest of the class that you're fair. Because if you let it slide for some kids, if you fail to give a sanction to a child because you like them, or normally they're good, or they're so badly behaved that you're kind of almost scared to give them a sanction, then the kids will see this really, really quickly, and they'll know you're unfair. They'll know that you only give them out on a person-by-person basis. So for sanctions to be highly effective, they have to be highly consistent. So here's a weird thing. If you want to give out fewer sanctions, be more consistent with your sanctions, which means you've got to be really clear why you're giving them out. Don't be ambiguous or vague. Let the kids know exactly why you'll give a sanction out, and let them know what the tariff is. And you've got to know yourself. And I would suggest you lean heavily on the school sanction system. And I'll finish on this. The rewards are very, very useful again, but they're also only short-term behaviour modifiers. They also don't transform people. Rewards are lovely. We love giving rewards far more than sanctions because we like to give things and we like to see their little faces light up when they get their smiley face or whatever, or their little sticker in their books. And they do love that. Sometimes they do. But rewards themselves don't make people good either. You can over-reward people. One of the biggest problems I find with the rewards, especially material rewards, stuff that you can get, is that it tends to be the worst behaved kids that get all the rewards. I'm not saying they shouldn't. They should certainly get some of the rewards. But the problem is if all the really well behaved kids get nothing. So you really think about making sure you give out reward points for kids who do good things but aren't bad enough to earn merits to modify their behaviour. So the best reward, it goes all the way back to Maslow, which brings us nicely full circle for this discussion. The best reward is praise. Sincere, targeted, proportionate praise. The best reward is when you can give somebody status and meaning and value and recognition and glory, honour, whatever you want to call it, through sincere, targeted, proportionate praise. Don't gush, don't give blanket praise, don't make stuff up. Don't just say you're wonderful. Tell them why they're wonderful. Tell them what they did that was wonderful. So praise. The best thing about praise is that it's free, but it's not cheap. And you can really tailor praise. This is the weird thing about praise. Whereas sanctions have to be highly consistent, praise can be very, very, very targeted and boutique and individual. And often it has to be. If you get a kid who comes into your lesson with a dirty collar, no pens or whatever, and one day comes in with a clean pressed shirt and 3 pens, you walk up to that kid and say, well done, your uniform looks great, thank you. So nobody else can hear. And they feel 10 inches taller. And if you got a kid that comes in all the time with good uniform standards, you don't say to them, sorry, I'm throwing my bottles of shot. Sorry, that's not very nice for you. You don't say it to them because they'll think you're daft. They'll think, oh, I always have a nice uniform. So what you say to that student once every 6 months is, listen, I just want to say that your uniform is always fantastic. You are always on time, which is brilliant. You always had your homework on time. Your homework's very high quality. You always take really care over your essay questions. Your contribution to the verbal life of the class is terrific, and you're a pleasure to teach. And I'm going to send a postcard home to reflect that because you are a credit to me and a credit to your parents. Thank you very much. That's the praise you give to that student, the great, lovely student, once every few weeks, once every 6 months or whatever, because it's tailored and targeted to them. And it's personalized to them. So that's a weird thing about rewards. Rewards actually work really well when they're targeted and tailored to the individual. There's a few other slides I've got there, but I always put more in than I need. So don't worry. You're more than welcome to have a look. I'm happy to send these slides to the organizer if any of you want them. But I'm conscious of time like land. It's the thing they're not making any more of. And I want to know if you've got any questions now.